Good morning, perhaps good afternoon, maybe even good evening. Today we are going over the latest of the patch notes, the latest of the announcement from Blizzard regarding 9.1. This is going to be the day where we go over the Mythic Plus and dungeon changes planned for 9.1, as well as the freshly announced changes to the Soulbinds, because there is quite a few big nerfs to Soulbinds, and also, of course, quite a few changes to dungeons. We have gone over a few of these changes to dungeons over the last couple of few weeks, but there is quite a few changes that are pretty important and are new as of today, as of yesterday, which is worth going over to remind everyone, to warn everyone of the changes happening in dungeons, in Mythic Plus particularly. Now, before going over, let's remind everyone that these changes are going to go live when Season 2 opens, which is on July the 6th. Next week, there is no Season 2, there are no new changes to the affix, to the seasonal affix, etc, etc. This is only going to happen the week after, on July the 6th, when Season 2 officially starts. Now, the first point Blizzard puts is the recent change, the very fresh change, that Mythic and Mythic Plus enemies' auto-attack damage is reduced by 10%. Now, you might underestimate this change because you are a fire mage and you have basically barely ever gotten auto-attacked, maybe a couple of times when you stole aggro and you combusted too early, perhaps, but for the most part not really. Well, melee auto-attack is actually the vast majority of the damage that your tank is going to be taking, so that is very relevant. This nerf to enemies is very relevant for tanking. We have gotten several changes in an attempt on helping the tank, right? We already got before some damage to auto attacks, we already gotten some extra tankiness being given, extra resistances being given to tanks over Season 1. Several annoying Affix Nerfs, which were going to hurt tanks the most, which we will go over now, have also been implemented, so a lot of help has been given to tanks so far. Now, we have the announcement and the adjustment of the item level. Item level rewards, basically everywhere, are going to scale up by 26 item levels. The current Mythic raiding quality gear is 226. In Sanctum of Domination, the current base Mythic raiding quality gear is going to be 252 item level. So a jump of 26 item levels, which is going to be consistent with the rest of the rewards. Baseline rewards now start from a base item level of 184 from normal dungeons, 197 from heroic, and 210 from mythic dungeon. So, as an extension, Mythic Plus dungeon rewards have had their maximum item level increased by 26. Currently, the Great Vault's highest item level, from a plus 15, is going to be 226. In 9.1 is going to be 252, if you complete a plus 15. Remember, there is also the change that you do need a plus 15 to get the max item level from the Great Vault, and not the plus 14 like you need in 9.0.5, like you need now. Now, where is the adjustment of the power level of the dungeon though? Heroic dungeons enemy damage has been increased by 6% and the enemy health has been increased by 16%. Mythic dungeons enemy damage and health has been increased by 26%. This is base Mythic, okay? Whereas Mythic Plus dungeons enemy damage has been increased by 35% and enemy health increased by 39%. This is why you often hear, this has always happened, since after Legion actually, this is why you often hear this talk about, oh yeah, doing a plus 18 is going to be like doing a plus 15 in Season 2. Oh yeah, if you were doing a plus 13 after the patch, it will be like doing a plus 10. This is because the dungeons are being scaled up in power to prevent the keys scaling out of control when it comes to how far you can go with the key. If Blizzard just let you scale up in power, if it lets you scale up in item level, if it lets you scale up in borrowed powers without increasing the base strength of the dungeon, it would mean that in Season 2 people would start doing plus 30, plus 35, plus 40 keys, and then when Season 3 comes in, they will be doing plus 45, plus 50, plus 55 keys, and go higher and higher and higher. So with these changes, progressively increasing the base strength of a key, you are staying still in the 20-ish range. This time it looks like it's going to be a little bit higher, in the low 30 range of keys. Then we have also the announcements, these were known already, about the quality of life changes. New dungeon teleports, Hero's Path. Completing each Mythic Plus dungeon at level 20 on time will now grant an achievement, and they teleport to the completed dungeon's entrance. The teleport has an 8-hour cooldown that resets after completing a Mythic Plus dungeon, which kind of makes sense. You know, you teleport to the dungeon and then you complete it, and the reset comes in. And then we have the quality of life of Tashup. Tashup in the Hall of Holding in Oribos will now offer a keystone to players who don't have a keystone, as long as they have completed at least one Shadowlands dungeon on Mythic Plus difficulty. Furthermore, Tashup now spawns at the end of Mythic Plus dungeons that are completed before the time limit is reached. He will offer a one-time keystone exchange to any player whose current keystone is at or below the level of the dungeon that was recently completed on time. Keystones that are higher level than the dungeon that was recently completed on time cannot be traded. So if you are doing a plus 15 of someone else and you have a plus 14 in your bag, and that plus 14 is Theater of Pain, and you really don't want to do Theater of Pain again, if you complete that plus 15 in time, you can just talk to Tashup that spawns at the end of the key and just get your key from Theater of Pain changed into something else. It's still going to be a plus 14, it's just not going to be a Theater of Pain anymore. Now we go to the changes to the actual dungeons, most of which are going to be nerfs. These are the affix changes that we went over already, actually, so moving quickly through them. Bolstering now increases maximum health by 15% instead of 20%. The damage remains the same, but the health is not going to be as high as before. This won't change too much. It's still going to take you a lot of time if you fuck up the bolstering mechanic in Mythic Plus keys. Necrotic. Level 61 enemies now apply Necrotic Wound on every other auto-attack instead of every auto-attack. You probably don't have too clear of an image of who are the level 61 enemies or not, but generally speaking, it's the big guys. It's the more threatening guys in a pack. It's the guys that cannot be crowd control. It's the guys that, generally speaking, cannot be moved or have uninterruptible casts. You know, the more annoying ones usually are level 61. Those are the ones that, at the very least, won't be applying Necrotic as fast as the small guys, the chumps, the little guys. Raging, the enrage of raging has been reduced in damage done from 100% more damage to 75% more damage. And finally, storming. Storming whirlwinds now always move in the same direction, in the same clockwise direction, and the movement of the storming itself has been reduced by 30%, and storming whirlwinds are now going to dissipate once a target is hit. So it's going to make it much more clear and much more manageable for melee players to deal with storming after these changes. Now on to the actual dungeon nerfs. Akar has gotten a significant, possibly the biggest nerf of all of these bosses, because Akar's cooldowns and energy regeneration is now paused when Blood Barrier is applied, and will resume only once the barrier is removed. Blood Barrier no longer grants Akar immunity to interrupts. This is, though, however, irrelevant since he won't be casting anymore while Blood Barrier is active, so this is kind of self-explanatory. Blood Barrage is no longer interruptible and no longer has a duration. It now persists until Blood Barrier is destroyed. So Blood Barrage is basically going to be cast throughout the Blood Barrier. The difference is that now Akar won't be gaining energy. We went over this already. This was very dangerous because the more time it took you to break the barrier, the more energy he was gaining. And the more energy he was gaining, the closer he was to cast the barrier again. At higher keys, this could prove extremely dangerous because you could reach an endless loop where you would take so long to break the barrier that by the time the barrier was over, he would immediately recast the barrier again. So basically he was unkillable at some point. With this change, it's gonna be much, much more manageable. Dealer Zayaxa has gotten nerfed as well in the other side. Arcane Lightning periodic damage has been reduced by 15% and the jump damage has been reduced by 20%, and the Arcane Vulnerability left behind now only increased damage taken from Arcane Lightning, and not all of the rest of the Arcane damage from the boss. Arcane Lightning is more or less the most dangerous mechanic of the entire encounter. The rest of the encounter on Zayaxa is basically just dodge stuff, and remember to jump up when she's about to blow you up. That's it. Managing the jumps of the Arcane Lightning is really the toughest part of the encounter. Halls of Atonement has gotten some changes. Now, you might wonder, well, Halls of Atonement is already kind of easy. What changes could they apply? Lawyer Stormborn melee and Stone Breath damage reduced by 10%. This is likely more of a nerf than a buff to the players, because the Lawyer Stormborn is the one that you get if you are a Venthyr. If it's the one you can control. So most of the time you're not going to be killing a Lawyer Stormborn. You want to use it for yourself, for your own gain. So this one is more of a nerf to you than a buff. Shard of Alkia's trash damage has been reduced by 20%, but the range has been increased to 60 yards instead of 40. Previously, you could move in and out of range to dodge the damage. Now it's going to be much harder. At the very least, you won't be able to continue damaging the Shard of Alkia if you want to out of range it, but the damage is reduced by 20%, so it's much more manageable now. The counter to this is that Depraved Obliterator's Wicked Bolt damage is increased by 27%. Wicked Bolt is the spammable spell of the Obliterator, which can be interrupted. So Blizzard is putting more importance in interrupts on these type of trash pulls in Halls of Atonement. To be fair, there isn't much you can interrupt in Halls of Atonement, so this is a pretty good, it's a pretty good skill check to increase the damage of these types of casts, to keep you on your feet with your interrupts. Then we have changes to Mists of Tir-Nasyth. Yes, indeed. Also nerfs to Mists of Tir-Nasyth, because Ingram Malok's health has been reduced by 10% and Roman Olfaran's health has been reduced by 5%. This was, the very long tyrannical phases of the first boss of Mists of Tir-Nasyth, which was the most, I guess, boring part of the dungeon. Drast Buffbreaker health has been increased by 15%. Mistveil Guardian's Back in Rampage now triggers its cooldown on spell start rather than on spell end, and Spinemo Staghorn health has been increased by 30%. So buffs across the board for the trash of Mists after nerfing the first boss. We have some further nerfs to Necrotic Wake. If you didn't think that was possible, yes it is. Amarth, second boss in Necrotic Wake, has gotten its health reduced by 15%, and its main threatening ability, Tortured Echoes, the dot damage he does after the explosion of his minions, is going to be reduced by 15% per stack. Nalthor, the Rhinebinder, the last boss, is going to have the HP of his minion at the end of the gauntlet, Zolrama's Siphoner, reduced by 15%, and the champion's boon duration, so the buff that you get from completing the gauntlet, is being increased to 40 seconds instead of 30. So only nerfs to the bosses of Necrotic Wake. Same can be said for Plaguefall, where Globgrog has gotten its health reduced by 10%, the first boss. We also have gotten the very recent change we covered a few days ago about the rigged Plague Borers. Rigged Plague Borers that spawn during the Gauntlet event now only have limited spawns. They spawn 4 times in pairs, so only 8 of them are ever going to spawn. And the Rigged Plague Borers that are located outside of the Gauntlet, right after the first boss, now have been replaced with Wretched Plague Borers, and they no longer use Plague Bomb. They no longer blow up and do tons of damage anymore. So the only Plague Borers you can abuse are the 8 during the Gauntlet, and you will not have any more of them. We now have another bunch of nerfs to Sanguine Depths. Juggernaut Rush damage reduced by 15%, and Essence Absorption damage, so the blow up of the orbs damage, reduced by 15% for Crixis, the first boss of Sanguine Depths. And the second boss of Sanguine Depths, Executor Tarvold, has gotten its add. Its spawning add Fleeting Manifestations, Growing Pride, so the pulsing AoE damage, reduced by 20%, which is pretty strong of a nerf. Chamber Sentinel's Severing Slice now only strikes the primary target. Previously, this would actually apply the bleed to all the targets in front of him, so now it's just gonna be basically on the tank, essentially. Remnant of Fury's Explosive Anger damage has been reduced by 25%. The Vestige of Doubt no longer casts Growing Mistrust, and the Research Scribe's Explosive Vellum now detonates after more time, 3.5 seconds instead of 3. So not just boss nerfs in Sanguine Depths, thrash nerfs as well across the board. Then a few more changes. One we covered, I think a couple of days ago. Ventunax has gotten the change that when the channel for the recharge of Ventunax completes, all the active Shadow Worlds are going to despawn. So now you can only have 2 active Shadow Worlds at any given time in the encounter, no more than 2. Xav the Unfallen in Theater of Pain has gotten the banner health reduced by 20%. And surprisingly, Zira, the underhanded, has returned in Mythic difficulties only. She basically disappeared once she went from Heroic to Mythic. Now she's back. Those were all the changes related to the dungeons. There were a few ones that are new and a bunch of them that have been released over the last few weeks. This is the compendium of Blizzard in the patch notes right before the release of the patch. But now we have to go over the new changes, which are going to be the Soulbinds, because there are quite a few important nerfs. There are some buffs as well, that's worth mentioning, but the bigger changes are going to be nerf related. Starting from the fact that all existing Soulbinds now have 4 new rows. You will get to choose between 3 new conduit slots, 1 potency, 1 endurance and 1 finesse, and then 2 new traits and 1 final trait at the end. The first big change is for Kyrian, because Pelagos, the most used of the Kyrian Soulbinds, Combat Meditation's mastery has been reduced by 10%. Hefty nerf to one of the stronger points of Pelagos. Clea, Pointed Courage's chance to critically strike for nearby enemies or ally is increased to 2% instead of 1% per ally, up to 6% instead of 5%. So roughly 1% more crit. Not much else. The main change for Kyrian in terms of buffs comes to Mechanicos, which is basically never used as Kyrians. The amount of spells and abilities required to summon Brawn in Brawn's Call to Action has been reduced to 75 instead of 90. Also, the damage and healing of Brawn has been increased by 10%. Meanwhile, the defensiveness of Mechanicos has been nerfed, because Soul Steel Clamps are now going to reduce the duration of stuns and incapacitates by 15% instead of 30%, and the Sparkling Driftlow Core cooldown is increased to 1 minute instead of 45 seconds, and it now triggers at 30% HP instead of 35%. We also have gotten some changes to Necrolord. The main one is that the Volatile Solvent of Marileth is now going to always grant you the humanoid buff when you use Fleshcraft, even if there is no enemy around. This was the main annoyance of Fleshcraft, of this passive trait. Giving you a benefit based on the creature's type always meant you had to have a creature next to you, which is kind of okay in Mythic Plus, but it becomes nearly impossible to use properly in raids, right? Because when you're pulling a new boss, there is nobody around you. So this basically means this is always going to give you 120 mastery. Even when you're getting extra bonuses because you're next to other bodies, you're still gaining the base 120 mastery of Fleshcraft, which is powerful. You know, this is a free secondary stat buff just by picking Marileth. There has also been a buff to the damage of Marileth, further buff, Plague's Preemptive Strike. Your first attack or spell cast on an enemy increases your damage done to them by 12%. Instead of 10, and the duration has been increased to 15 seconds instead of 10. The only nerf is PvP oriented, because Ooze's frictionless coatings absorb value has been reduced to 7.5% of your maximum health in PvP combat instead of 15%, so literally cut in half. No other major changes when it comes to Necrolords. When it comes to Night Fae, we have gotten another one of the major nerfs, which is to Nia. Nia's tools Burst has gotten its damage reduced by 8%. Pretty important nerf, because this was the OP trait. This was the broken trait for Night Fae and for Nia. However, 8% is still very little. It's still going to be the strongest of the traits and a very powerful trait overall. Dreamweaver has gotten some buffs, because Field of Blossom's duration has been increased by 20% and the haste increased to 15% instead of 12%. There has also been a minor but important change to Hold the Line of Korain. Physical damage reduction has been reduced to 12% instead of 15%, and even nerfed further in PvP combat, because it's going to be reduced to 6% of physical damage reduction in PvP. Lastly, we have Venthyr. Another one of those PvP nerfs where Familiar Predicaments from Nagia is going to reduce Interrupt and Snare and Root effects only by 15% instead of 25%. And more PvP nerfs for General Draven. Enduring Gloom absorb value has been increased to 20% of your maximum health instead of 15%, but nerfed to 10% of your maximum health in PvP combat. Hold Your Ground's stamina bonus has been reduced by 50% in PvP combat. And lastly, Built for War now provides 1% of primary stat every 2 seconds instead of every 3, and it stacks up 5 times instead of 4. So it's gonna take you 2 less seconds to stack this up fully, and you're going to be gaining 1% more primary stat. These were all the main changes for Soulbinds as well. So the two strongest Soulbinds, Pelagos and Nia, have gotten their base effectiveness nerfed, whereas many of the other Soulbinds from Marileth to Mechanicus to Dreamweaver and even Clea have gotten some buffs here and there. So we are at the end of this compendium. We have gone through the official statement of Blizzard related to both dungeon and Soulbind changes. Eventually we will get a few more of these videos when Blizzard continues basically their official press release before the patch is out. For now we can stop here. I am rather in line and okay with most of the dungeon changes. Yes, it's going to suck in the first couple of weeks when you are very undergeared for 9.1 standards, but eventually it's going to progressively get easier and easier and better with all these nerfs to the dungeons, hoping it's going to make it smoother to play compared to what it's been in Season 1. So, we have to depart now. Thank you guys for watching the video. If you want to support the channel, you should leave a subscribe, possibly a written letter of congratulations to myself down in the comments, and that will be all. See you guys soon. And in the meantime, I'm eating peanuts. Very nice.